On Tuesday, voters in South Dakota will go to the polls to take part in the second-in-the-nation presidential primary. This evening, those voters will have a chance to hear the views of the Democratic presidential candidates. On the program tonight, former Governor Jerry Brown of California, Governor Bill Clinton of Arkansas, Senator Tom Harkin of neighboring Iowa, former Massachusetts Senator Paul Tsongas, from neighboring Nebraska, Senator Bob Kerrey, and joining the five major candidates, Larry Agron, the former mayor of Irvine, California. Coming next, we will take you to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, for this live C-SPAN 2 coverage of the debate. This debate has been arranged to focus on five specific topics: the economy, agriculture, healthcare, the environment, and Native American issues. More than 700,000 people live in South Dakota, nearly 30% of them in metropolitan areas. The largest cities include Sioux Falls, Rapid City, and Aberdeen. More than 90% of South Dakotans are white, and the Native American population is about 10%. Agriculture is South Dakota's main industry, and the state capital is Pierre. This debate will also be seen tonight on our companion network C-SPAN beginning at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time.
From Sioux Falls, South Dakota Public Television and Radio present live coverage of the South Dakota Democratic Presidential Primary Candidate Forum. And now, here's the moderator of tonight's program, Cable News Network correspondent and analyst, Ken Bodie.
Welcome to Election 92, the South Dakota Presidential Primary Candidate Forum. Tonight's forum is sponsored by the South Dakota Democratic Party as part of its annual Jefferson Jackson Day celebration. Also, the forum is being broadcast statewide by South Dakota Public Radio and Television and nationally on C-SPAN. I'll be asking the candidates assembled here tonight questions about issues that affect the people of South Dakota and rural America. Tonight's forum will be broken into 6 segments. We will have discussions on the economy, agriculture and rural development, healthcare costs and access to healthcare, the environment, and Native American affairs. And we'll also have closing statements by each candidate. If time allows, we may get into some other subjects as well. The major rule we are operating under tonight is a simple one: basic fairness and common decency. The candidates have been instructed to try to keep their responses to 90 seconds or less. The order in which the candidates are seated on the stage here tonight and in which they will take questions has been determined by drawing lots. Each of the candidates will have the opportunity to answer at least one question from every subject matter first, except for Senator Tsongas, who has elected to give his closing remarks last. All those things determined by lot. Also, we'd like to ask one thing of our audience here in Sioux Falls tonight. Please do not applaud or cheer your candidate's responses. You'll only be taking time away from him and from all the rest of us in terms of the issues we'll be able to discuss. Now let's meet the candidates. They are, from my left, Governor Bill Clinton, Governor of Arkansas; former Governor Jerry Brown of California; Bob Kerrey, Senator from Nebraska; Paul Tsongas, former Senator from Massachusetts; Tom Harkin, Senator from Iowa; and Larry Agron, former mayor of Irvine, California. Just one more word to the candidates. This is the first time you've all been together in a forum like this since the New Hampshire primary and since the New Hampshire economy was the major issue you faced. Our questions tonight will have a lot more of a Midwestern focus, Midwestern flavor. I'll try to put them to you more in terms of what an ordinary citizen might ask you, and I hope your answers will be along the same lines. Gentlemen, thank you for coming to South Dakota and participating in this forum. We'll begin first with the economy, and Senator Harkin gets the first question on the economy. Senator Harkin, One of Governor Clinton's advisors recently called for a total phase-out of farm subsidies and said that there's no reason to preserve family farms, no economic justification, only cultural reasons. Any thoughts on that?
Well, if he were my advisor, I'd fire him. First of all, I think he's dead wrong. First of all, look back to World War II. The biggest earner of export dollars for America, the industry that's earned the most in our export dollars has been agriculture. Sure, we've supported agriculture. Darn right we have, but look what it's done for us. Made us the most productive nation anywhere on the face of the earth. And we have to support agriculture because what's happening now is we're being inundated from foreign countries. Look what's happened with the Canadian Free Trade Agreement. They're subsidizing their hogs about $16 a head, about $131 a head on their fed cattle, and they're coming into this country undercutting our farmers. And then we just had this fast track agreement pushed through by Bush last year. I voted against it. I agreed with Senator Daschle. We voted against it because we thought it was bad news for our farmers and people in the Midwest. Because what's going to happen is they're going to start flooding our country with cheap beef and cheap pork and things like that, and we won't be able to compete. So I say that we've got to support our farmers. But even beyond just the support of farmers themselves and price supports, we've got to start developing new products in agriculture, new technologies that will help us. And this is one thing I want to bring to your attention. This is a computer chip made in Memphis, Tennessee. It allows a car to be driven on 85% ethanol. I got this from the South Dakota corn growers. With that, we can start driving our cars, 85% ethanol. That means we don't have to buy as much oil from the Mideast. We can clean up our environment. We can provide a lot of jobs here in South Dakota and all over the Midwest. And we can do it and keep our money here in America. This is the wave of the future for agriculture.
Let's give Governor Clinton a chance to respond to this if we could. Governor Clinton, would this economic advisor be working in the Clinton administration, or would he be on his way to the White House woodshed over this?
You ought to be ashamed of yourself for asking the question. You know that guy's not on my payroll. If he were on my payroll, he'd be off of it. He was an advisor to me on taxes, not on agriculture. The poor man's never lived off the East Coast. He doesn't know which end of a tractor you drive. My agricultural advisor, my chief agricultural advisor, is my junior Senator David Pryor, who is the ranking Democrat on the Senate Agriculture Committee, is the chairman of the subcommittee that oversees all commodity programs. He and Senator Max Baucus from your neighboring state of Montana have agreed to support me and advise me on agriculture and on agricultural trade. The people who criticize me, which include both Senator Harkin and Senator Kerry, know that I've been a farm state governor for 11 years. I have always supported the family farm. I've always supported appropriate farm support programs. I have initiated a lot of things in my state which have become models: a farm mediation program, a first farmer loan program, a linked deposit program to help farmers get low-interest loans to expand their operation, all kinds of initiatives in water and sewer and rural community drinking water programs, a nationally recognized rural fire protection program. It's amazing to me that Senator Kerry would attack me on an ad, since we served on the Agriculture Committee of the National Governors Association together, where I was the spokesperson for the governors from the farm states to reorganize the farm finance system. And let me just say this in closing. I talked to Bill Janklow this afternoon just to refresh my memory. You remember him, he used to be your governor. In 1985, South Dakota's governor called me because we were the first state in the country to institute a farm financing system that allowed banks to write off farm mortgages over 10 years. South Dakota copied the law in the legislature, and Janklow said today it's one of the best laws ever passed by anybody anywhere. Not a single farm bank in South Dakota was lost, and a lot of farmers recovered their land because of it. Don't you let anybody convince you that I'm not for the family farm. I've got 11 years of working for it.
Senator Kerry, what did you attack Governor Clinton about that he was talking about here?
I made a reference to Dr. Carroll, who has been an advisor. Now, if you say it's just on taxes, my understanding was that he'd participate in the development of the plan that you've been advertising, but we'll leave that aside. Let me respond. Let me respond.
You hired a guy that attacked me, and I didn't ask you to fire him.
Calm down, for gosh sake.
And you were paying him.
Take it easy, Bill. I mean, all I did was say that you've got a guy that helped you develop your plan, that has made some rather provocative and negative statements about agriculture. And look, we've lived for the past 11 years under administrations that have come into the Midwest and talked to us about what they're going to do for agriculture, and then they stick it to us. You know, as to the overall question of the economy, let me respond if I can to that, because I'm running for President of the United States because I believe we need fundamental change in this country. And first of all, we need fundamental change in our foreign policy. I believe that global prosperity means prosperity for America. I believe if we are able to achieve this elusive goal of world peace, that will mean American opportunity as well. We have an obligation, just as the wise men did at the end of World War II, we have an obligation at the end of at the end of the Cold War, to do the same thing. I also believe we need fundamental change in our domestic policies. I was out in Rocky Flats, Colorado yesterday, and there's 6,000 to 8,000 workers out there that are manufacturing the plutonium trigger for nuclear weapons. Well, it should not come as a surprise to anybody to learn that it's unlikely there's going to be much demand for nuclear triggers. And we need to get our government organized, not just to support agriculture, which I believe is the fundamental foundation of every healthy economy, but to go on and win economic wars in this nation. We need a consumer electronics industry. We need a semiconductor industry. We need an automobile industry. We need to make sure that we're prepared to fight economic battles. And finally, I'm prepared to argue that we need fundamental change in our values. My parents wouldn't have dreamed of borrowing $400 billion a year to buy stuff they wanted. They wouldn't have dreamed of leaving me a world with increased debt. They did just the opposite. And unless we change those values, it seems to me that the United States of America will struggle to achieve the economic greatness that I believe most Americans want and are prepared to fight for in the post-Cold War era.
Thank you, Senator Kerry. Mayor Agron, most of us are just getting acquainted with you. One of the things that several people on this stage tonight support is a middle-class tax cut. How do you stand on the middle-class tax cut?
I'm opposed to the middle-class tax cut as it's proposed. I think that the last thing we need, on top of a $350 to $400 billion a year deficit, is to add yet more dollars in deficit. What we ought to be doing is levying a 1% wealth tax in this country. Now, many of you know that I've talked about reorganizing national priorities, cutting our military budget in half, bringing home a $150 billion a year peace dividend, and doing it not in 10 years, as others here propose, but doing it right here, right now, right away. We can't wait, and the Cold War is over. It's time for us to claim its benefits. I've argued that $50 billion of that $150 billion ought to be earmarked for honest deficit reduction, but that's not enough. On top of that, we need a 1% wealth tax. What that means is that we would identify the 1% wealthiest households in the country and levy a 1% tax on all their aggregate wealth. This would generate a $30 to $50 billion a year pool of tax money, new revenue, that would help us reduce this deficit. And when you add to it Paul Tsongas's tax on energy, we're darn near the closing of the gap on the budget deficit. So what we have to do is be honest with people, not pander to voters by way of a middle-class tax cut, a general across-the-board tax cut, which only means heaping further debt on our kids and on their kids.
Senator?
On the issue of farm families, are we all going to be allowed to respond to that, or are you just going to...
Would you like to respond to that? I have a question here for you, but I'll be glad to let you respond to that if that's what you want to do.
If I could. The discussion was the value of family farms, not only economically, but also culturally. Fact is, as Tom pointed out, our trade deficit is enormous, and if it wasn't for the fact that we export agricultural products, it would be much worse. So there's a sound economic argument to keep the family farm in place and viable. My father-in-law out here, Colonel Savage, grew up in South Dakota. He can tell you how much of a struggle that was. But the other piece of the puzzle here is that family farms, like small business, which is how I grew up in Massachusetts, are important culturally. Our nation is only as strong as its culture. And to the extent you wipe out the family farm and replace it by larger entities, you lose some of the chemistry, some of the glue that keeps a society together. I think all of us up here would be committed that our Secretary of Agriculture will be somebody from a farm who understands the cultural dimension as well and will be committed to preserving the family farm.
Governor Brown, in this part of the country, education and the economy very much go hand in hand. South Dakota students usually score at or near the top in national achievement tests like ACT or SAT. Employers snap up college graduates and high school graduates from this state because they've mastered basic skills and they have good work ethics. Yet South Dakota pays its teachers among the worst in the country, and it pays less per pupil than most other states. In other words, this state turns out good students cheaply. The question is this: is more federal money to education necessarily the answer to the nation's educational woes, What non-financial ideas do you have to better the American education system?
You know, I've never heard it put that way. So here you have a good achievement, and you're trying to find out what's wrong. I mean, if that isn't a Washington solution
No,
to
that's
a
a South Dakota
non-problem,
question. We're trying to figure out what besides throwing money at the problem would do.
Well, I thought we were talking this first question about the economy.
That's why I prefaced it by saying the
And if-
economy and education.
I don't want to
go
do
hand.
anything to mess up this high achievement that you just described about the students here. Obviously, if more money can be generated to pay the teachers, I think this profession deserves a great deal of honor and respect, and the federal government should make a contribution to equalize through federal funding to a measurable extent the gap between the rich and the poor districts. But we have to do that in a careful way because, as you point out, places in Utah and South Dakota are doing very, very well, and other places they're paying twice as much, have a much bigger dropout rate and a lower achievement rate. So I'd like to respond to what I thought here was the main point about the economy, because I do have a proposal which I would consider if it isn't the only new idea in this campaign, at least it's close to being that, and that is to revamp this whole tax system. I believe, whether it's the family farm or small business or just ordinary Americans, that the 4,000 pages of the tax code is, as Jimmy Carter once said, a disgrace to the human race. And I would like to replace all that with a flat, fair, honest tax of 13% on gross income and 13% on value added, and bring in the exact same amount of revenue as you would get from the Social Security tax, the income tax, as it's now written, the corporate tax, the gift and estate, the gasoline tax. I don't want to abolish all those. I differ with Paul Tsongas on that. I don't want to increase the energy tax, the gas tax. I want to eliminate it, because I believe that if we had a tax that you could figure out without hiring an accountant or a lawyer, it was so simple you could put it on a postcard, that would unleash tremendous investment. And it would, for a very simple reason. The tax code changes every 3 years, and that's deterring investment. Now there's some people who want to lower capital gains. In 1986, they raised it. The investment tax credit is now being sponsored by 3 out of the members at this table, and just in 86 it was abolished. A few years before, it was expanded. I want to see the politics, the corruption, the campaign money taken out of that whole tax writing business, and have one simple 13% tax deduction for rent, home mortgage interest, and charity, and that's it. And then business 13%, and you can expense all equipment purchases the first year, and if you're on Social Security, you can earn whatever you want without losing your benefits. To me, this is simple, fair, and it'll drive this economy forward. And thanks for giving me the extra few seconds.
You got the extra few seconds, okay.
We just handled the whole tax code in less than 90 seconds.
Can we answer the question you asked him?
No, we're really running out of time for this section. Ladies. I do have one question. I think
You asked him a wonderful question about
we ought to
education.
ask Paul Tsongas a question. No, Governor Kerry says that you know so little about farming, and that you think that a combine is when you mix a martini. Is that? Do you know?
That was not me that said that. It's a great line, but I did not say that.
Do you know what a combine is?
Well, look, I do think it's very important.
Could I answer the
although we-
question?
I'm sorry you were quoted as having said that.
Well, he just quoted me incorrectly.
I'm
so-
sorry.
Let Harkin give the hog line. That's even better.
We're not likely in the course of this evening to get an opportunity to discuss the details of our program, regrettably.
Actually, we're going into that
well,
section right now.
I'm going to say that we're not likely to get into the detail of it. And I've, having been governor, not just of an agricultural state, but a state that suffered nearly 12,000 farm failures in the 1980s. I mean, it is a crucial thing to make sure that not do we just talk about family farms, but understand that there is something the federal government can do to orient itself and support family-operated agriculture.
Could you read the quote again, please?
No.
Well,
that I won't
Can
do.
you answer me this? What is a martini?
Let's go on to agriculture and a question for Governor Clinton.
Could I just make one comment? I acknowledge that, Bob Kerry and Tom Harkin know a lot more about agriculture than I do, but I know how to listen. I know how to learn. I don't come here and say, you ought to plant this or you ought to plant that. I'm in the process of trying to have a policy that makes sense. I don't compete with you, Bob. in terms of your knowledge.
Are you
So,
ready to denounce your 5 cent a gallon gasoline tax
Can I
per year
finish?
for 10 years? That's 50 cents a gallon. Tell all the people
Tom,
how much
I did not interrupt you. I did not interrupt you. Please don't interrupt me. Let's have some. We spoke about common decency. Let's practice it in this debate.
Senator Saugus, you finish this, and we're going to go directly
We
then to a
speak
Governor
plainly
Clinton
and
question
yeah.
on agriculture. Go ahead.
The point that I'm trying to make is there has to be a policy that is coherent. And I don't compete with both of these friends of mine in terms of their expertise. But what I'm saying is there are policies like export, where I've not Japan bashed. Japan bashing and looking towards a trade war potentially is going to hurt the farmers in South Dakota. So there's some things that I stand for, fiscal discipline, that have relevance here. So please, just give me some capacity and some slack, sir.
Governor
I'll give you all
Clinton.
the slack you want, but I do think, Paul, it's important to disclose that you've had votes on agriculture, that you participated in debates in previous, and you've been on record and have positions on agriculture. It's not like you're coming into the state learning it all just now. You have had positions, and you have taken positions in this campaign that are very relevant in the debate.
I'm not
I'll cut you
suggesting-
all the slack you want. I'm not trying to be personal. I'll cut you all the slack you want. I will be respectful in this debate. But it seems to me that with respect to the debate, that it is important what you've said and what you've previously said, particularly when you were in the Senate.
Okay, gentlemen, now we're going to go back to the format of this, and we're going to talk to Governor Clinton about agriculture for just a second. In an effort to help small farmers, Governor, the 1990 Farm Bill capped payments to individual farmers at $50,000 in an effort to restrict the amount of money that large farms could receive. But in many states, large farmers get around these regulations and increase their allowable payments by subdividing their farms out to different people, frequently their own children. Do you endorse this practice, and what would you do to get supports to those who really need it?
Well, the first thing I would say is that as a governor from a farm state and as someone who's actually done things to save family farms, some of which I got to outline earlier, I think the last thing we ought to do is reopen the 1990 Farm Bill right now. As a practical matter, these bills are authorized for 5 years. The last time we opened the Farm Bill in 1990, we had a 25% reduction in farm supports. And any attempt to open it, in my view, would likely result in harm to the overall farming population. Do I think it should be changed now? I do not. I'll tell you why. The purpose of the Farm Bill, among other things, is to manage the gross supply of food and fiber for our country. This Farm Bill seeks to do that. The farmers in this state are in pretty good shape now. We don't even have all the regulations out on this Farm Bill. My own view is we ought to see how it works, let it go, and continue to work on breaking down unfair trade barriers, as Senator Daschle was trying to do on pork, on increasing exports and the use of the Export Enhancement Program, which will benefit all farmers. Today, too much of that is in the hands of the Office of Management and Budget. In my state, which is a rice-producing state, we just lost a 20,000 metric ton sale to the former Soviet Union, and Italy got it because Dick Darman, instead of the Agriculture Secretary, was making the decision. That's what I think we ought to do. So I would not do anything that would reopen that 90 Farm Bill right now, knowing what the complexion of the Congress is and what the attitude of the administration is. You know, Clayton Yoder may be out of the Secretary of Agriculture, but he's a looming presence there. And between Yoder and Darman and the city folks in Congress who are in our party, I think it'd be a terrible mistake to reopen the Farm Bill. I'd leave it like it is, try to do these other things to help all our farmers.
Any of your other gentlemen have a comment on this one?
Oh, well, first of all, I mean, if I was president, I definitely would reopen it. The loan rates are too low. I voted against the Farm Bill because it's a program that orients through basically large corporations and large grain dealers. That's what it did. It attempted to wipe out the farmer-owned reserve. It is not oriented through the family-operated farmer. It's oriented through an entirely different organization, and I would reopen and get the loan rate up. I mean, if you have a, but wait a minute, he's asking me the question. I mean, it is entirely true that when you've got a president and Clayton Yoder that are opposed to any farm program at all, which is their position, it's entirely true that to reopen it right now is risky. But if I was president, I darn sure would. I mean, the loan rates are too low, and it makes it difficult for us, it seems to me, to be able to get the price in a range where the producer can make a profit without having to provide a subsidy. I mean, one of the things Republican policies have done.
I'm going to say a word here.
That's not the question you asked.
I want to say a word here. That,
Governor.
You know, the trouble is those with the least power get the least hearing in Washington. The whole basis of my campaign is that there are two views of the world. There's inside the Beltway, inside Washington, It's a world of obscene pay raises for the senators, and two of them here I have to acknowledge did vote for them. And it's also a view of the world that Egypt and the Middle East and all other places are more important than a family farmer or a small businessman or just individual families. And I would say, and this gets right to the point, that people have lost their farms because they didn't have the ability to pay back loans at the very time when our president was giving $7 billion to Egypt, when we're giving $18 to $20 billion in foreign aid. And I'd like to make the point, what is needed here is a reorientation to America. And I would say this, I wouldn't give a penny in foreign aid until every small farmer and businessman and family in this country was taken care of. And that's what's wrong with this policy right now. Those are the international people, the people in Washington, they're taken care of, and Americans are getting short shrift. That's the problem. And you got to fight that, or all the special little programs mean nothing, because they all get carved up by the money, the lobbyists, and the lawyers who own Congress. That's why I won't take any more than $100, because we, the people, have to change it, and we will.
Mayor Agron.
Yes, Ken. I want to speak to the farming question, but first I want to speak to the common decency and fairness question. You know, this is one of the first times in recent weeks that I've been allowed to participate with these gentlemen, notwithstanding the fact I'm on 36 ballots across the country. There's no other Democrat in America who is on the ballot in state after state, but who has not been participating in nationally televised debates. And when I hear Jerry Brown, the grand champion of raising special interest money through the 70s and 80s, giving lectures to the rest of us about special interest domination, I'm up to here with it. I'm up to here with it. And I'll tell you something else.
Well, then why don't you follow it? Why don't you take the same policy of not
Because
taking
I have
more than
never
$100?
accepted PAC money. I have never accepted
talking about
PAC money.
$1,000 contributions
You have raised
from-
tens of millions of dollars
You're
in
right.
California and elsewhere.
I have. That's
and
why I
you're
know
a
how
Jerry
evil
come
it is.
lately to campaign finance
No,
reform.
that's not true.
We're going to get
That's
back.
why I know this
Now let
system
me
won't work.
say with respect to farm
Mr.
policy.
Agron, I hope
Just
you
a
will
second.
follow your policy, because you're not
Now
doing
let me
that.
say with
Just
respect.
a second, Mr. Mayor Agron. What we're going to do right now, I want to have a dialogue here tonight, and I think we... What'd you say?
I've got a whip and you can lash us all.
What I would like to do, I don't want a rigid format here. We didn't agree on a rigid format. I'd like to have a loose format. I frankly don't mind seeing you guys disagree a little bit and having the format a little loose, because I've seen so many tight debates. However, we're going to stay to the topics at least, okay? We're going to stay to the topics. There are people in this audience that want to hear about farm policy. Now, I'm going to ask Senator Tsongas a question about that. Senator Tsongas, more than 50% of the farms in this state are owned by people over 50 years of age. Young farmers are disappearing in America because they can't get banks to loan them the money they need to start their own farms. What would you do to improve the lending situation to American farmers?
Well, the first thing you do is have a president who thinks he has jurisdiction between the Atlantic and the Pacific, who cares about these kinds of things. The fact is, the issue of credit is not just a farm issue. It's an issue of small business all over this country. And the fact is, American regulators, the people who regulate banks, have put such a stranglehold on those banks they can't lend. The criteria is so strong. What you need is a president who says to the regulators, you have to give the banks the room they can go out and lend money. Banks want to lend money. That's what they're in the business for. They have relationships with farmers and small business people. They want to provide that credit. But the fact is, the regulators, because of the S&L crisis, when they under-regulated and allowed the fiasco to take place, went right up the pendulum the other way. Now they're over-regulating. So as president, what I would do, I think we agree on this. Day one, you go to the regulators and you say to them, I'll take the heat. Loosen up, give people credit, not only for their sake, but for the economy's sake, so that the small businesses and the farms can survive. George Bush has no sense of these things because his interest and his heart is in foreign policy, not what's happening on the farm or small business or Main Street America.
Senator Harkin, today's farmers are older, they're poorer, and they're fewer than ever before. Yet the Department of Agriculture has bulged to record size. What would you do to get the money out of government agencies and back to the farmers?
Well, first of all, you've got to reorganize the Department of Agriculture and make it focus on smaller farmers. In 1990, Senator Daschle had an amendment on the floor of the Senate to the Farm Bill that would have focused price supports more towards the family farmers. It was a two-tier price support system. In other words, for the first number of bushels of grain that you grew, you'd get a high price support, and then anything over that, you'd get a lower price support. It was to focus it towards family farmers. I supported that. And quite frankly, Senator Kerry did not support that. And that's just one of the differences between us. And I think that's a difference that we're going to have to talk about here tonight, about just where do we want to focus our farm attention. Now, Senator Kerry and I both represent farm states. We've been good friends, and we're going to be friends after this is over, but there are differences between there are differences between the way we approach these things. I just mentioned one. Secondly, on the fast track to Mexico. Again, that's going to hurt our farmers, just like the stuff that's coming in from Canada now. If you think that's bad, well, you see what's coming in from Mexico. That's going to hurt our farmers. Again, Senator Daschle and I voted against fast track. Senator Kerry voted for it. Every one of these people support fast track. Mr. Tsongas, Mr. Clinton. I don't know about you, but
What do
Mr.
you mean you
Clinton
don't
and
know
Mr.
about me? You know
Tsongas.
darn well I don't.
Know about you on that
I
one.
don't either.
And Mr. Agron doesn't. So I'd say Kerry, Tsongas, and Clinton all support the fast track, and I don't, and voted against it. And lastly, a couple of years ago, again, we voted to triple ethanol production by 1994. And Mr. Kerry voted no against that. Well, now he may have his reasons, I'm sure he does. But I'm just saying that when it comes to family farmers and supporting family farmers and trying to get the economy going in rural areas, we have different kinds of approaches. And now lastly, let me just say this about Mr. Tsongas. He has proposed that we raise gasoline taxes by 5 cents a gallon per year over 10 years. That's 50 cents a gallon. And I don't know, I just have to say this. Here's the Boston Globe, 1982. Reagan's budget good for business, Mr. Tsongas says. Well, I don't know, maybe it was good for the junk bond dealers and the corporate mergers and the big boys on Wall Street, but it wasn't good for our family farmers, Paul. And I have never spoken out in favor of Reaganomics or the Bush economic program. I was never a cheerleader for it like you were.
I think Senator Tsongas is going to. I think Senator Tsongas needs to.
You know, I'd like to answer the questions.
Well,
Somebody ought to do it while we're
Go, Paul Tsongas, please.
well, I think Bob Kerry deserves a response as well. Would you like to? Let me just say a couple of things. One, this is the first time that you've believed the Boston Globe.
Well, evidently
The second,
does all right for you, I guess.
The second point is I voted against the Reagan budget, and I believe that you did as well. And we were one of the few people who did that. The third point on the gasoline tax, we just had a war, and people died. We have no energy policy. I'm trying to put an energy policy in place so we're not dependent on the Persian Gulf. When I put the 3 cent a year to 5 cent a year gasoline tax in, you think I didn't know that I could be hit with this? My responsibility is to this country, not to say what sells. We have to have an energy policy, so we're not dependent on the Persian Gulf. So somebody in this room or your children will not be over there again putting their lives at risk. My position is not popular politically, but it's responsible. You've had all these presidents, one after another, who did not have an energy policy, put us at risk. All this money flows out to the Persian Gulf. When I'm president, we're going to have an energy policy once and for all, and I'm proud that we're going to do that.
Let me tell you what we're going to do now. We're going to go to Senator Kerry for a response, Governor Clinton for a response, and then we're going to move on to another subject. Governor Kerry.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think Tom and I are going to be friends when this is over. But this, I've worked very hard on ethanol in the state of Nebraska. I've actually built plants in the state of Nebraska. The state of Nebraska is the state where ethanol actually began. The idea of gasohol began in the state of Nebraska. There's some disagreements on what a small farm and a big farm is, and those are legitimate. But let me talk a little bit about trade and this fast track notion. Tom's voted actually for fast track 5 previous times, and we did not give, in this particular vote, the President carte blanche authority. We will have an opportunity to vote on that treaty when it comes back. But let me point out something here. We have an historic opportunity in America today to convert old enemies into new customers. Heard Jerry Brown taking a shot at foreign aid. I'm critical of foreign aid as well. But we have 320 million people living in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. They would like to buy products from us. And they cannot buy products unless their standard of living goes up. The reason the wise men after World War II are so admired today is because in the face of a desire to retrench and pull back, they were bold and put in place treaties that allowed for world peace to be a reality. And they developed new markets with the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade. I don't believe those old structures are going to work anymore. But the idea does. The idea that global prosperity equals American prosperity, the idea that world peace means American opportunity, that idea is just as valid in 1992 as it was in 1946.
Governor Clinton, could you please keep it brief? We're going to fall a little bit behind
I can,
here.
but, nobody's answering these questions. So I want to briefly. Number one, Senator Kerry is right. No one has agreed to the agricultural terms of the North American Free Trade Agreement. No one has agreed to the agricultural terms of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. South Dakota exports the highest percentage of its livestock and crops of any farming state in the United States. We have got to keep these markets open and expanding. Number two, what would you do for first-time farm buyers? That's very important. The average age of a farmer in America today is 60 years of age. You ought to take the program we started in Arkansas with low-interest, tax-exempt bonds and go national with it. Number three, what would you do with the Agriculture Department? I'll tell you what I'd do. I'd forget about Washington, and I'd worry about Lone Oak County. My farmers complain because they have to spend so much time every year, even when prices are good, going to the ASCS office, the SCS, going to the Farmers Home Administration. By the time they get through shuffling papers, they've aged another 3 years. We ought to have one-stop shopping for farmers. We ought to have integrated computer systems for all these farm programs. People ought to be able to get served at the same place. Now, those are some simple ideas that would change the face of America. The final thing I want to say is a lot of us have energy policies, and I have to tell you, it is frustrating to me to be told that the only morally appropriate way to wean America off cheap foreign oil is a nickel a gallon gasoline tax on the middle class and the family farm for a decade. There are other ways to do it that don't burden the middle class. Your incomes went down and your taxes went up in the 80s, and Senator Tsongas wants to give you more of the same in the 90s, and it's wrong.
Thank you. Mayor Reagan, we just have to move on. We'll give you a chance to do it in your wrap-up or in another section. That concludes our section on agriculture and other things. Our first question on health care goes to Senator Kerry. Rural health care is a vital issue for South Dakota. Small towns have a tremendously difficult time attracting and keeping doctors. Small hospitals, because of inequities in the way that Medicare money is allocated, have a hard time in treating people at any kind of a profit. These factors have forced many South Dakotans to drive long distances to even get the most basic health care, up to 100 miles to a hospital sometimes. How will your health plan improve service in the small towns and rural populations of a state like South Dakota?
Well, Ken, my health plan is called Health USA. I introduced it in July. Senator Moynihan, when he was in New Hampshire the other day, endorsed it. It is a very simple proposal, and it will transform the nature of health care in rural communities. Rather than having to go to Washington to beg for money for special delivery systems for rural health care, rather than having to go and beg money from anybody, Americans will know that they have health care as a consequence of being an American. And rather than paying through a premium-based system, it is a tax-based system. It allows us to budget health care at the national level. It is managed at the state level. No American will ever again lose their health care if they lose their job. We will be allowed to, for the first time, to do continuous health care, not just for all of our children, but in rural communities today where it is extremely difficult to get general practitioners and pediatricians because the money, Ken, flows to the individual. Finally, I point out again that it is a very important competitive issue as well. It's not just the access that this proposal solves. It solves the access problem absolutely. But it also puts America in full operating opportunity in this post-Cold War era. We're the only industrial nation that says to its workers, lose your health care and you lose your job and you lose your health care. In the state of South Dakota, a wheat farm in the state of South Dakota pays approximately $5,000 more than a wheat farmer up in Canada, just on the question of health care. And American businesses across the board are seeing the same thing.
Is there anything in your plan, Senator, that would go directly to the point of the question, which is what do you do to help these small rural towns?
Absolutely. There is something. First of all, understand that when the money flows to the individual, we'll be able at the state level to fashion rural health care delivery systems that are far better than what we've got today. Secondly, there's a $2 billion item in the proposal itself called a resource development that allows us to deliver health care to underserved areas. And about half of those underserved areas are currently in rural areas. So where the financing doesn't get the job done, there's a special resource development fund that allows us to extend out and do delivery itself.
Mayor Hagan, what is your health care proposal?
The idea of national health insurance is the compelling idea of our time. And if we put national health insurance in place on an emergency basis, the fact of the matter is that dollars for medical care will be available in rural communities. People will have access to a health insurance plan by way of a card, by way of a publicly financed system, and that will attract doctors and others to rural areas so that they too will get a fair measure of health care. Let me say something else about this health care business too. If we begin to think ahead, we can actually overcome many of the intractable problems we have faced with respect to health and moral issues in our society. For example, a decent national health insurance plan ought to have written right into it the full range of reproductive choice so that any individual with a health insurance card can go to any physician, any health clinic, and be entitled to the full range of reproductive choice, contraceptive information, contraceptive supplies, as well as the right to a safe, legal abortion anywhere in the United States of America. This ought to be part and parcel of a health insurance plan. Let me say something else, too. The question of drug treatment, drug education, that ought to be folded right into national health insurance. So should alcohol recovery programs, smoking cessation clinics. All this is going to cost money. That's why I've said we've got to have a $150 billion a year peace dividend, out of which we carve and dedicate $40 billion a year to underwrite the costs that we're going to have to incur to make health care available as a matter of right to each and every American.
Governor Brown, how would you increase the number of hospitals available to the nation's rural populations, and how would you encourage young doctors to practice in rural areas like South Dakota and Nebraska?
Very simply by setting up a national health care system with a single payer and dealing with the number one problem in the health care system, and that is as reported as recently as this week, incredible profits, greed, excessive payments to drug companies, equipment salesmen, for-profit hospitals. To get anywhere in the healthcare area, we're going to have to create a single-payer system that will make absolutely unnecessary the entire for-profit insurance function insofar as health policies are written. That's the only way to cover everyone, all right? That's different than what in fact, it's different than all of these except for Senator Kerry, and I would differ with him in that I would not leave any function for-profit insurance companies. I think we ought to get rid of that, because I think greed is the problem.
What does that have to do with small communities in the middle of the state?
Because if you have an overall health policy with one budget, this year it's $800 billion, but if you put it as a democratically determined total budget, then you can start allocating rural health. You can say we're spending on heart bypasses. In the cities, we have too many cosmetic surgeons and other kinds of things. In this part of the country, we can begin to have a real national set of priorities because there will only be one payer. It's similar to the Canadian system. We know it will work. It can emphasize wellness. I also, in terms of the doctors, sure, give an incentive to go to rural areas. Forgive loans for medical school. Create a medical corps. That can be done. And I think we ought to also include other kinds of healing practices, chiropractic. When I was governor of California, we legalized acupuncture. We want freedom of choice of doctors and hospitals, and this kind of plan would do that.
Clinton, how
but
would
before we get any further, I've got to say,
to
I have to finish one point of this. I think it's within the 92nd minute, the 92nd response here.
90
Look,
minutes.
Harry Truman proposed the same thing that we're talking about today, all right? And nothing happened. Teddy Kennedy proposed the same thing 20 years ago. We have to face the fact that the money, the medical lobbies, I have a Common Cause report here that shows $60 million has been given to Congress in the last decade to make any kind of change impossible. If you don't get at that point, which is at the heart of my campaign, you'll never be able to get whatever good plan the geniuses can design.
I'd like to get whatever Governor Clinton wants to say next. Go ahead.
Well, you hit upon a very important point. That is, you can cover everyone with a system like a European system or a system like the Canadian system. You can attack cost controls by insurance reform and healthcare bureaucracy reduction and taking on the drug companies and the equipment merchants and all of those things, and you're still going to have a lack of access in rural areas and in inner city areas. unless you have a separate funding line to set up public funding of clinics in rural areas and in inner city areas and basic health services in the schools. I also feel very strongly, this is a personal issue with me because so many of my constituents and my friends live in towns without doctors. So many people I know have to drive a long way just to see a dentist or a doctor. I have done what I could to establish clinics in rural areas. You've got to have a separate fund. One other thing, this administration has done everything it could to gut the National Health Service Corps program. We need to reinvigorate it. It ought to be a part of paying for education. We ought to put those doctors back out there, nurse practitioners back out there, and do things that will guarantee rural access. And you have to fund it separately. Just changing the financing system and covering everybody will not get the job done.
Senator Tsongas, let's stay on these same points if we can, because this is so very important to rural states.
Let me say that Bob Kerrey put his program out early on, and I did the same thing. Mine is really quite different. Mine is based on the private sector competing. You have to control costs, and the best way to do that is to use the forces of the marketplace after the government says that health care is a basic right. I think most of you know that I've been through my own difficult health situation, and I was saved because of the medical care available in this country. So I feel very strongly about everybody should have that access. But let me say one thing. You know, Bob and I disagree on approach, but the fact is that we're running against George Bush. George Bush's plan, quote, is a tax credit. That tax credit means that you get a tax credit for your health insurance. Then you have to go out and compete and negotiate with a provider. That Bush health care plan is cynical. It was just an attempt to put the words health care in a State of the Union message. So there may be differences between us, but let me just say broadly that if you want health care, you're not going to get it under George Bush. You'll only get it if one of us becomes president of the United States.
Senator Harkin, you're from a rural state. Would you agree that access in places like Iowa, North Dakota, South Dakota is more important than cost in this matter?
Well, first of all, let me just get to the whole area of rural health care, because this is an area that I feel very deeply and very strongly about, and it's something that I understand. I didn't have to read about it in any books either. I was born and raised in a town of 150 people. I was born at home, in a house. I had no doctor to attend my birth, neither did any of my brothers or sisters. I can't remember the first time I ever saw a doctor. I know the first time I ever saw a dentist, I was in high school, and I got the fillings to prove it, too. So we never had doctors. I always thought, if I could ever get in a position to do something about rural health, I'd do it, and I did. I now chair the Appropriations Subcommittee on Health in the United States Senate. And here's what I've just done in the last 3 years. First of all, I authored a bill called the Rural Health Outreach Grant Program to get grants out to rural states for preventative care and primary care in rural areas. South Dakota now gets more grants under that bill I authored than any state in the United States, and I'm proud of that. So you're already getting it out here. Hospitals in Porcupine, Isabel, Vermilion. The Rural Hospital Transition Grant Program that I expanded. A lot of rural hospitals had to close their doors. So I put in a new program and funded it so that hospitals could provide other services like adult day care, child care, ambulance services. 12 of South Dakota's 56 hospitals now get those rural hospital transition grants and are able to keep their doors open. In alcohol, drug, and mental health, I found that the formula went against people in rural areas. So last year I changed the formula. This year, South Dakota stands to get 16% more in alcohol, drug, and mental health grants than he did last year. And in National Health Service Corps that Bill Clinton talked about, he's right. Old Reagan gutted the program. I took over the subcommittee in 1989, and I've doubled the funding for the National Health Service Corps in 3 years, doubled it, and wrote in the provision in the law that also provides for funding for nurses and physician's assistants to get into rural areas. So these are the things that I've done in the Senate to get health care out there. So a lot of other people have been talking about it, and while they're talking, I've been doing.
Senator Harkin, gentlemen, that concludes our section on health care. Mr. Agron has the first question on the environment. Mr. Agron, one of the biggest environmental issues in recent years in South Dakota is whether or not this state should landfill other states, particularly eastern states, garbage. Landfills in the more populous states seem to be filling up. Do Midwestern states and Great Plains states like South Dakota have a responsibility to take in other states' garbage, and how would you go about solving the nation's solid waste problems?
No, they don't have that responsibility to take other people's garbage. As a matter of fact, in the city of Irvine, we received an environmental award from the United Nations for 3 environmentally important breakthrough programs. One was setting aside 16,000 acres of open space for permanent preservation, including agricultural lands. The second was adopting an ordinance banning the emissions of CFCs and other ozone-depleting compounds, a pioneering ordinance that's been copied by cities around the world. And the third was recycling. We discovered that recycling can be done in your own community in a way as to reduce the waste stream dramatically. And this ought to be the case everywhere as a matter of national and local policy. It applies to nuclear energy as well. This idea of producing nuclear energy, as Paul Tsongas wants to do, and then dumping the waste in Nevada, that makes no sense at all. State against state, person to person, opposition to one another, makes no sense at all. But let me tell you, cleaning up this environment is going to cost one heck of a lot of money. I propose that we set aside $20 billion a year out of this $150 billion a year peace dividend for stepped up environmental protection, reforestation, cleaning up our toxic and nuclear waste sites, family planning around the world, doing all those things that have to be done. But I'm getting a little concerned hearing over and over again here what we have to do by way of education, health care, fixing up our economy, rebuilding the infrastructure, you name it, we all have a plan. Where's the money coming from? Not one person yet has talked about cutting that military budget in half and doing it right now to give us the wherewithal to rebuild the American economy, address these environmental concerns, and be attentive to national and international concerns at the same time.
Senator Larry, I've been talking about cutting the military budget in half for some time now.
Yeah, Jerry, you're the one who was for the B-1 bomber in the early 80s
All right,
when we were
gentlemen.
working against it.
Okay.
It cost us $50 billion for a damn plane that doesn't fly.
Californians seem to want to take the gloves off on each other here tonight. Senator Tsongas, you
I
come
don't know
from
what I
you
did
come
to deserve all this attention.
you come from an eastern state. What do you say about the question that I asked Mayor Agron?
Well, the fact is, the mayor is correct. I hope I don't offend you by agreeing with you.
No.
Um,
Just don't send me your nuclear waste.
Recycling is the future. I serve on the National Recycling Advisory Committee. Fact is, this administration has denigrated the notion of recycling. The fact is, if you take it seriously, people want to recycle. I mean, the younger generation is far more environmentally sensitive than my generation. They are ready. But unless you have a president who can get out there and say, folks, recycling is how we're going to do these things, it's never going to happen. So unless you reduce the volume of waste, you're going to have these problems. And I think
if we recycle efficiently in the east, that there won't be any trains and trucks coming with garbage to the Midwest?
I'm not suggesting that's not going to happen, and I think you have to provide hope and places in the East. But the fact is, until you reduce that volume, this problem is going to continue. And the reduction is quite possible. There are markets now out there for recycled materials. All you need is a president who says, for example, talk about taxes, I would give the recycled products an advantage over virgin materials. I would put a fee on the use of virgin materials so that when you talk about recycling, it's not just theory, but you give the manufacturer a reason and a rationale to go out and get recycled products into the mainstream of production in this country.
Governor Clinton, you want to respond?
Yeah, this is a problem, like a lot of these problems tonight, that I've actually had to deal with. Our state was targeted by people from back east who wanted to bring a lot of their garbage in. There are already landfills in most southern states taking out-of-state waste. I know you've dealt with it here in South Dakota, and I know some of your officials are in favor of doing it, and many people think it would be good for your economy to do it. One of the things that we should do is that the United States Congress should pass and the President should sign an act which gives every state the right to ban the import of out-of-state waste, because right now, under prevailing law, the Supreme Court will rule that garbage has a constitutional right to travel. And I'm just telling you, we don't have the power to do it forever now. The states ought to be able to decide. Then, I believe, I support everything that everybody said about recycling. We have an aggressive program going, and we're buying a lot of recycling paper for our state government. We have a plant in Arkansas that's agreed to take 100% of the office waste paper and the newsprint for recycling in our state, and we're gathering it up. One other thing you need to do is to press and give incentives to the major companies in this country to reduce the amount of solid waste they use in the first place. waste reduction can lead to major increases in profits, reinvestments, and new jobs in America. We have a program in our state economic development department that does nothing but try to help industries reduce their use of solid waste in the first place. You got to do both those things, but the President and the Congress should give states the power to say no, because as long as they don't have the power to say no, then instead of being a matter of local control, it'll be a matter of big bucks back east, and it's not right.
Governor Brown, there are a lot of trade-offs in environmental questions. If you're elected president, what environmental standards that we have now would you relax in order to create jobs or make American businesses more competitive abroad?
I wouldn't relax any of them. I think that's a completely false premise. When I was governor of California, during my 8 years, we created 2.2 million new jobs, more jobs than Bush has created for the country, and an incredible percentage of all American jobs, all right? And we had the toughest air pollution laws, water quality control, the first comprehensive pesticide regulations, the most comprehensive coastal protection, forestry regulation. I mean, what we did 10 years ago is now just spreading to other states. So what is the truth is that economy, efficiency, and environment all go together. And what I believe in terms of the environment, that we have to make a commitment as a country to reduce hazardous waste, ordinary waste, and nuclear waste. And the way we do that is to phase out nuclear power within the next 10 years and go full throttle toward renewable energy, wind turbines, ethanol, the entire gamut of efficiency and renewable sources. And if we do that, we can create millions and millions of jobs, and with the efficiency that's created, we will pay back whatever cost the investment required. And we know that that happened in California because we today, in that state, generate from biomass, wind, solar, and geothermal enough electricity for 4 million people. It's been called the window of the future. So I can just say from personal experience that protecting the environment is protecting the economy, protecting our health, and respecting nature, of which we are an integral part.
Senator Kerry, we haven't heard from you on this question yet.
I noticed.
Somebody has to be sixth up here,
Well,
fellas.
look, as to the question that you just asked Jerry, I mean, I don't think we need to loosen regulations. But we do have some regulators that need to be loosened up a bit. I mean, the EPA, in carrying out this mandate in rural communities, has very often come up and said that we're almost going to shut you down because we find a Superfund site close to you, and we are going to charge you and bill you for it. We've got a major groundwater problem in the United States of America, and what we've got to do is come up with a regulatory mechanism that allows us to hit the tough federal objective, but carry the regulation out at the local level, which is what we tried to do down in the state of Nebraska. But let me also say on the environment, once again, it isn't the other guy typically that's at fault. And we are rising on a pile of garbage in the United States of America that is of our own making. I would encourage the folks in the East to recycle by not allowing them to export their garbage to the Midwest. But we all need to reduce the amount of garbage that we're generating. We are 4% of the world's population, consuming 25% of the world's energy. We don't need to raise gasoline taxes to increase efficiency. We can increase efficiency with CAFE standards on automobiles, with increased standards for building materials, with increased standards for appliances, and create American jobs in the process and allow us to arrive in the year 2000 confident that we've just fought our last war for cheap oil. The environment and economic development can go hand in hand, but only, it seems to me, if you've got the capacity to carry out the regulation at the local level.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Harkin, do you have something to say on this subject?
I just say on the environment that we really do have to move to recycling. I agree with all those that have said that. But one thing that hasn't been mentioned is how we get there. And I have proposed that we institute a system of what I call fee-bates. In other words, if you make a product and you package it that's in a non-recyclable package, you would pay a fee. If you make a product and you put it in a package that is recyclable, you get that fee. So there's no net increase to the taxpayers, but it goes from those that don't recycle to those that do recycle, that make recyclable packages. And that way it would encourage people to make more recyclable products. Secondly, I would just point out that we can actually put people to work in this area and save money. There are more people working now in the aluminum can recycling business than actually work in making aluminum cans. And so we actually can provide jobs. Lastly, let me just say about nuclear waste. That is, again, a problem that we have to confront all over this country. And that's why I agree with those that have said that we have to phase out nuclear power. I do not believe we need any more nuclear plants in this country. That's where Mr. Tsongas and I disagree. I believe we can use more natural gas. We can go to more energy efficiency. As Jerry Brown said, if we go to energy efficiency, it's been estimated we could save up to $2.3 trillion in the next 40 years. And then we can move to solar energy and solar hydrogen energy, which is a clean, recyclable energy system. And then, and I hate to sound like a broken record on this, let's start making ethanol. It keeps our money at home. We don't send it to the Mideast. It puts money in our farmers' pockets, our rural pockets, and it cleans up the environment.
Senator Kerry, one of the things about being a neighbor of South Dakota is that everybody knows you're here. Another is that sometimes they have specific questions they want to ask at a forum like this. Where do you stand on the Boyd County nuclear dump site? As president, what would you do about this matter? And if it works out that you aren't president, would you act consistently with that position in the Senate?
Yeah, I mean, we no longer need that site. I mean, we started off in the early 1980s with 12 or 13 sites being developed through a compact system. We're now generating about a fourth of the amount of waste that we thought we were going to generate. We've been trying to get the Bush administration to reopen the Low-Level Nuclear Waste Act, and as president, I would reopen it and consolidate the sites, not, by the way, just so that we don't build one in Nebraska, but because we don't need that site in Boyd County. We don't need 12 sites, we only need 3 or 4.
Thank you, gentlemen. That concludes the section on the environment. The next section is on Native American affairs. There are 50,000 South Dakotans who are Native Americans. Governor Brown, you have the first question on Native American affairs. In 1980, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the 7.5 million acres of the Black Hills had been taken illegally from the Lakota Sioux Nation. Senator Bill Bradley of New Jersey has sponsored a bill that would return 1.3 million acres of those federal Forest Service lands in the Black Hills to the Great Sioux Nation. The South Dakota congressional delegation and the governor have opposed that measure. Do you favor a return of all or part of the federal lands in the Black Hills to the Lakota, Dakota people?
Yeah, I would favor some way of compensation for what has happened. The original peoples who inhabited this land thousands of years before any Europeans were thought of have suffered a horrible genocide. There's no question about that, and we have to own up to it. I know it may not always be the most popular thing to say, but we as a people have to heal, and we don't heal unless we acknowledge where we've come from. And a people that is so closely aligned with the land, with nature, can be our teachers, our spiritual teachers. And this country, in all its materialism, has a great deal to learn from the native peoples. When I was...
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were finished.
No, you like to rush me here, that's okay. Yeah, I think it's important because in our world where everything is individual property, a people who were for thousands of years, pencil, paper, this is mine, that's yours, kind of thing wasn't part of the culture. And when the land is crucial as part of the identity, I think we have to do everything we can to restore the integrity of this culture consistent with modernization where we are now. When I was elected governor, Nancy Reagan had built a new mansion on Indian burial ground. I wouldn't move into it. It was later sold. And in fact, there was a very controversial case here when Governor Janklow wanted to bring back Dennis Banks. And I wouldn't do that because I think we have to do something to heal the past as we move on to the future.
In one word, Governor, would you support or oppose the Bradley bill?
I would support a return of a sufficient amount of land to maintain the cultural integrity and to go beyond where we are now, which is these reservations, welfare type thing, which is continuing to destroy a proud people that we have not yet owned up to and haven't done anything about. So the Bradley bill goes in the right direction.
Reservation, haven't you?
Yes, I've been to the Pine Ridge Reservation. Let me say, just so he'll relax a little bit, I generally agree with Jerry Brown on this issue, but let me go beyond that specifically. I believe the next president of the United States has to be big enough and strong enough to take a different approach, to come here to South Dakota, to see to it that the long, bitter trail of tears ends here in South Dakota. And that new president ought to bring with him his Secretary of State and sit down with the representatives of the Indian nations and negotiate here in the Midwest the kinds of binding treaties that can address the issues of sovereignty, of land, of mineral rights, and reconcile the differences that have been so terrible over the years. He ought to come as well with an apology for what has transpired. We need to move through this grieving process and into a negotiated treaty between and among great nations that will supplant and replace all the broken treaties of the past and let us move on to the future.
Mayor Agron, the apology, when you raise that question, you raise quite a specific issue, as you know. It's an apology specifically for what transpired at Wounded Knee. Would you favor that?
Well, yes, not only what transpired at Wounded Knee, but what has transpired throughout decades, over hundreds of years of American history. We have to own up to that. You know, we've been demanding of the Japanese an apology for Pearl Harbor. That's right. We have apologized to the Japanese Americans here in the United States for incarcerating them during World War II. We have to be practitioners of human rights. And that means we have to have a president who is strong enough and big enough to come here to South Dakota. Just as now we are trying to negotiate peace in the Middle East, we have to negotiate peace in the Middle West as well. And we have to give it every bit as much attention as we are those negotiations in the Middle East.
I don't think there is a more important issue to the Native Americans of this state, so I'm going to take this right to everybody and ask everybody on the panel to answer this same question. Governor Kerry, Senator Kerry, there are reservation lands in Nebraska as well. How do you feel about these questions?
Well, as to the Bradley bill itself, I do not support it. I would make an effort as a president to reconcile the differences between Native American and the non-Indian community. And I would make an affirmative action to come to the state of South Dakota to attempt to resolve those differences. I agree that apology is warranted over Wounded Knee. But I also must say, Ken, I've spent a great deal of time on the reservations. And when I'm there, their number one issue is education and jobs, health care. I ran in Rapid City a couple of days ago with 10 or 12 Indian children who have terrible health care. The leader said that they can't get dental care. Well, again, I hate to run a broken record, but national health insurance not only provides an opportunity for them to get health care, but equalizes the access, which is extremely important. It is the beginning of a change, not the end of change. I believe that on the reservation itself, that we need to come and help not only with education, not only with health care, but help to try to find real jobs. Real jobs that, in fact, I think can be built in this country in the post-Cold War era. Now that we're no longer fighting the Soviet Union, we can bring our energy home to fighting the real battles that we've got in America.
Governor Clinton, how do you feel about the Bradley bill and other problems on the...
I would not, support the Bradley bill as it's drawn now. I do think that the tribes are in negotiations and may be able to reach agreement on some other way of compensation. But I think you have to begin by giving the people of South Dakota some credit. A couple of years ago, I think a year of reconciliation was declared. I think we have to face the fact that what has happened is the Indian nations, in a way, have gotten the worst of both worlds. They've been able to continue to live together under circumstances that were often humiliating, often debilitating, with consequences that are often tragic. Tomorrow, I believe tomorrow, a task force of the Indian tribes will issue a set of recommendations on reorganization of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And they will ask to be empowered to spend more of that money in the way that they see fit, not the way the federal bureaucracy see fit. I think if you look at the sorry record of the last years and years and years, we ought to support the empowerment of the Indian tribes to decide how to spend that money to best benefit their people. Second thing I would say, in total agreement with Senator Kerry, is that there are proven strategies that have worked for other people who have economic problems, educational problems, health care problems. We need to bring affordable health care. We need to bring the kinds of education strategies that will really give those children a chance. And we need to bring the proven economic strategies that allow even some of the most depressed areas of our country to flourish in new enterprise. If we did that, they had a development bank like the South Shore Development Bank in Chicago. If they had parent-based preschool programs like the ones we have in the Arkansas Delta, if they had the kind of health care that we all envision, and if they had more control over their own lives, beginning with the devolution of some of this power and money from the BIA to them, I think we could make a difference and reconcile the historic problems.
Thank you, Governor. Senator Harkin, how do you feel about returning lands to the Lakota, Dakota Sioux in the Black Hills, which they consider to be so religious and so central to their...
Well, I think, first of all, you've got to keep in mind that not every injustice that was created 100 years ago or beyond can be corrected today. We can't account for every injustice, whether it's in the Mideast or here in the Midwest with our Native Americans. We do have to do certain things to try to heal wounds. Of course we do. And as president, that's what I would try to do, is to usher in a new era of reconciliation and understanding with Native Americans. But no, I'm not in favor of the Bradley bill because it tries to take care of a problem today that occurred a long time ago. And as I said, a lot of these injustices just can't be corrected today as much as we'd like to. Time has passed on. Events have moved on. People have taken over different things. You can't just throw people off their land now. And so you've got to understand that you just can't correct some of those injustices. The Supreme Court in 1980 awarded the Indian tribes $105 million with interest as a settlement. Now, they've been trying to decide since that time whether to accept that or not. I can tell you this, that if the tribes decide to accept that in payment, as president, I would make sure we got that through the Congress just like that, to make sure that they got the money and got the payment immediately with the interest that has accrued on that since that time. But no, in terms of giving the land back, we can't do that. But we can work with the Indian nations, with the Native Americans, as I said, to try again, as Governor Clinton said, for education, job training, health care. And again, under my subcommittee on health care, you can go out on the Pine Ridge Reservation and ask him about Senator Harkin and what he's done to get money out for fetal alcohol syndrome, for health care, maternal and child health care, all these programs that I've been getting money out to the reservations.
Let me let Senator Tsongas get his position on record here, too.
I would not support the Bradley bill. Fact is that there have been injustices in the past which have been spoken to, but there are human beings who are there. And the notion you're going to impose a solution on people who have invested themselves, you create another injustice, so the round continues. I think the suggestion of negotiations and people working together is the only way to do that. If it may also be a broken record, the fact is these negotiations and these discussions will have a much greater chance of fruition under a Democratic president than under George Bush. George Bush purposefully has chosen to divide this country so he could rule it. Our job is to heal this country by uniting it. There has to be a sense of we are one team. We are all one team, all of us, whatever color, whatever race, whatever sex, whatever, we are one team. That is the healing process that we're talking about. And so while we agree on this, it should be very clearly pointed out, the difference between our approach and that of the incumbent Republican president is enormous. And the time for healing will not take place until he's retired from the White House.
Yes, one more question on Native American affairs. The infant mortality rate is 3 times as high as the national average, and fetal alcohol syndrome is the cause of 50% of all learning disabilities in Indian children in South Dakota. Reservation health services are terribly understaffed. Mayor Agron, how would you handle that?
I think this ought to be part of the negotiated settlement of all outstanding concerns. You know, one of the problems is that we think we can buy our way out of every problem. We can't. If the Indians wanted to take the money, they would take the money and run. There is another interest that they are pursuing here, which is the interest of dignity, self-determination, control over their own resources, control over their own destiny. And I think if leaders of great nations can be called together in the Middle East to negotiate a peace settlement there, then certainly the President of the United States and the Secretary of State ought to sit down here with the leaders of the great Indian nations and negotiate all of these matters. That includes compensation, new programs. It includes an array of considerations. Let me say this too. I think it's very important that we recognize that people want to control their own affairs. They don't want to be getting money from Washington, D.C. to take care of local health concerns. They want to be having control over their own destiny. That means having a nation that is self-governing. That means adhering to the principle of self-determination. And that means taking seriously this proposal for a negotiated treaty that resolves all of these outstanding concerns.
Governor Clinton and then Senator Kerry.
I don't think we should wait for anything to attack the infant mortality problem, the low birth weight problem, the fetal infant syndrome problems. In my state, we brought the infant mortality rate down 40% in the last decade. My wife and I and our administration have worked very hard on things that we know work. We ought to make sure that every pregnant Indian woman sees a doctor 6 times before that baby is delivered. We ought to make sure that these children, before they reach puberty, and certainly after puberty, have access to counseling services and the direct health services where they go to school and where they live. We have got to have alcohol and drug abuse treatment facilities for people where they live. This shouldn't have anything to do with the resolution of all these conflicts. This is about saving people's lives, and it's unconscionable that here where the Indians live, and that many of our inner city areas and in rural areas in the Mississippi Delta where I live, the low birth weight rate, the infant mortality rate, and the rate of alcohol and drug abuse among mothers is as high as it is, and it's because we have not done what we know works, and we should not wait for anything to start doing it.
Senator Kerry.
I agree with Governor Clinton. Unfortunately, the only way to really stop it now is to pass national health insurance. It really is. I mean, where you establish health care as a right for all Americans, you can come immediately for the first time and do the prenatal care for every children and have well baby care for every child. And again, I say it's almost an appeal. In Rapid City 2 days ago, I mean, here's 10 or 12 children. We can save them. We can save their lives. They don't have access to good dental care. They don't have good access to health care. They have a different environment in which they live than all the rest of us. We can save their lives, and the lives, by the way, of 11 million other children who live in America in poverty and don't have access to health care.
We have just enough time for Governor Brown.
You see, what is all being discussed here, it goes to the heart of our cause, and that is we have children dying and nothing's being done about it. We have a system that is spending trillions of dollars on other things, a lot of it for the powerful or in other countries. There's something fundamentally wrong with American politics, and we have to face up to that so we can change it. No child should be, whether Native American or black or white or anything else. It's just totally unthinkable, and it raises the question of what is wrong in Washington.
Gentlemen, this concludes the subject area section of our debate. Thank you very much. The candidates now have 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer the following question for us. Why should the voters of South Dakota vote for you for president in Tuesday's primary election? Senator Tsongas, as we know, is chosen to have the last closing statement. The remaining order was chosen by drawing lots. Senator Harkin, you have the first closing statement.
First of all, I want to thank the good people of South Dakota for their many kindnesses over the last 17 years that I've been privileged to come up here and hold hearings or campaign for people in South Dakota. I also want to thank you for having the good judgment to send to Washington Tim Johnson and Tom Daschle. You can't get them any better than those two. They just don't come any better than that. And when you go in to vote Tuesday, I want you to ask yourself the same questions when you go in and you vote for those two fellas. Ask yourself this one question. When the chips are down, which one of us are going to fight for you, going to stick up for you? I mean when the doors are closed in Washington and all the powerful and the rich and the special interests, when the decisions are made and the deals are cut, who's going to fight for you? That's why I say don't read our lips, read our record. For 17 years, that's what I've been doing, fighting for you. Working people, family farmers, elderly, women, minorities, people with disabilities, our friends in organized labor. There's one thing you know about me. No matter how thick the carpet, no matter how fancy the chandeliers, when we get in those rooms, you know I'm on your side and I'm fighting for you. Our campaign is proud to stand on democratic values. Our campaign will not apologize for being a Democrat. We intend to make George Bush apologize for what he's done to America. And our campaign will paint a vision and a program for the future of this country to build a new America, not from the top down, but from the bottom up. And as president, I will bring one other thing to the White House that's missing right now: care and compassion for people. So So on Tuesday, I ask for your support. I ask you to join our campaign. Together we can win the nomination. Together we can whip old Bush. Together we can build a new America.
Senator Hart.
Thank you very much, and God bless you.
Mr. Agron, you have the next closing statement.
Yes, I want to make Jerry Brown feel still more comfortable. Here's my 800 number. And for those of you who are out there in radio land, it's 1-800-727-9425. People throughout America haven't had a chance to see much of my 800 number. Let me tell you why. We've got a problem with democracy in this country. We've got a problem with democracy in this party. I have been campaigning long and hard since August 22nd on a program of what I call the New American Security, measured not by the force of arms abroad, but by the strength of our society here at home. I'm the only one calling for immediate steps to cut our military budget in half, to bring our forces home from Europe, to cancel needless weapon systems, to end foreign aid, to deliver a peace dividend to the American people. I think that's an important message worthy of an airing to the American people. And yet each of these gentlemen have been asked by me, directly or indirectly, to allow me to participate in nationally televised debates. And they have refused to stand up for that democratic principle of inclusion, notwithstanding the fact that my name is on the ballot in over 35 states. No other person in America beyond these 5 is on the ballot in 35 states. I think I have the right to be heard. And I ask you to ask yourself this question. If my voice can't be heard, what do you think the chances are of your voice being heard? If I can't be included in these forums and debates, what do you think the chances are that you'll be included in the governance of our country? Vote on Tuesday for new national priorities. Vote also for someone who's ready to stand up for the democratic principles of inclusion that have made our party and our country great.
Thank you, Mr. Agron. Senator Kerry, you have the next closing statement.
I also appreciate your sending us Tom and Tim, but did you have to send us Larry Pressler? The people of South Dakota will never have a better president than Bob Kerrey. I know the state as well as I know Nebraska. My campaign is about fundamental change. The Cold War having ended, we need to have a fundamentally different foreign policy, fundamentally different domestic policy, and fundamental change in our values as well. The other day in the New York Times, there was a story about the Bush administration planning 7 new wars, contingency plans for the possibility of war. And right below that article was an article about violence in the city of New York. Young boys carrying semi-automatic pistols around in the city. There were 16,000 drug murders in America last year. We don't have to look on this world for a war. We've got a war going on right here. I want to direct the best and brightest minds in America to the task of building a farm program that will restore health to our rural communities, to begin the process of change by passing national health insurance, by fighting to make sure that working women have all the opportunities that they need, fighting to make sure that we surround our children, our babies, with the best environment possible so they can grow to our full potential. I'm asking you to participate in fundamental change in our foreign, our domestic, and in our values. I'm asking you to participate in seizing the moment and building the nation and the world of our dreams.
Thank you, Senator Kerry. Governor Clinton, you have the next closing statement.
Ladies and gentlemen, all of us care about this country, and all of us, I think, have made a contribution to this campaign. What you have to decide is who would be the best leader for this country. My case to you is pretty simple and straightforward. I wish my state bordered South Dakota, but it doesn't. But it's a lot like yours. People with old-fashioned values who get up every day and do the best they can for their children, who think about the future as well as the present. Of all the people running today, I spent the largest number of years out there on the receiving end of the Reagan-Bush Revolution fighting for change. Of all the people running, I spent the largest number of years trying to come up with new ideas that go beyond brain-dead politics in the Democratic and the Republican parties, that will make Washington different and new and vital and alive again. Ideas like boot camps for first-time drug offenders instead of jail, systems to move people from welfare to work so that they can support their families, ways for people to finance a college education by giving some service back to our country here at home where we need it. This is a new age. I have fought for change. I believe we can challenge and energize and move this country. If you want your country to win again, if you believe we can be one again, I'm your candidate for president. I need your help, and I'll never forget your support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor Clinton. Governor Brown, you have the next closing statement.
I want to ask the people here, how many people here in this audience have never given $1,000 to a politician in their life? Will you raise your hand? Go ahead, raise your hand if you've never given $1,000. Well, I see most of the hands raised. This campaign is being waged, and I've been in them before, so I know what it is. But I've seen the corrosion of our nation's political life because of the big money and the obsession of collecting those $1,000 checks. That's why when I came back to politics, I decided to shift power to what I call we the people, to take no more than $100 to introduce a whole new element into American politics. The experts dismiss it. They say it isn't serious. But I know that all these issues, whether it's the family farmer, whether it's people suffering from AIDS, that's the way I wear this red ribbon, so we'll express that solidarity with their suffering, or whether it's working people or just ordinary American citizens. They don't have the power because of this enormous influence of money and lobbying in Washington. That's why I've set up that 800 number, and I'm glad that another candidate has picked it up, because we can revolutionize our politics if we return ordinary people into the process. Already 100,000 people have called it. The main results appear to be showing a victory for a we the people kind of campaign because their grassroots sentiment prevailed. I'm asking the people of South Dakota to think, which side of the line are you on the $1,000 giver or just plain ordinary Americans? And if you feel you can join with us, join this campaign, vote for us, and yes, call 1-800-426-1112 and be a part of the Second American Revolution.
Thank you, Governor Brown. Senator Tsongas, you have the final closing statement.
Well, I have a confession to make. I do not have an 800 number, and I apologize. I would like to leave 4 thoughts with you. One, as I said earlier, my commitment to the family farm. I grew up in a small businessman's home, and everybody in the family worked. We know what it's about, and not only for the economic reasons, but the cultural fabric of this country means that family farms and small businesses simply must survive. The second point is export markets. The fact is the great hope for new markets is not in the United States, it is elsewhere, the Soviet Union, the Pacific Rim, Japan, Mexico. I've avoided the temptation of protectionism and Japan bashing. As president, there will be new markets. I'm committed to that. The third point is national debt. I've been the candidate of fiscal discipline. I'm not for the tax breaks. I'm not for the giveaways. We have to look at economic truth, and from that, deal with those issues seriously. And the fourth point, I think you've met my father-in-law, Russell Savage, on television. He's from South Dakota. And it was as a result of that, I'm the only candidate up here who goes home every night to 4 people, my wife and my 3 daughters, who have South Dakotan blood in their veins. That doesn't make me an expert in South Dakota, but it gives me affection for this state, and I think that's important.
Thank you, Senator Tsongas. Gentlemen, I'm sorry, but that's all the time we have for this evening. Thank you once again for agreeing to be here tonight and share your ideas with the people of South Dakota. Before we go, a couple of programming notes. This forum will be replayed early tomorrow morning at 12:30 a.m. on South Dakota Public Television, so set your VCRs for that. Also, South Dakota Public Radio Tuesday night will have full coverage of the South Dakota presidential primary. Listeners can call in their opinions, they can hear political analysis, and they can get up-to-date voting results on a moment-by-moment basis. So South Dakota Public Radio's coverage begins 8 o'clock Central, 7 Mountain Time, and of course you can always look at CNN to get up-to-date coverage on that network as well. For the sponsors, the South Dakota Democratic Party and the South Dakota Public Broadcasting Network, I want to thank you for watching, for listening, and for being here tonight. I'm Ken Bodie. Good night.
For more information on this event, you can write to the South Dakota Democratic Party, Post Office Box 737 in Sioux Falls, South Dakota,